Hello guys, in this video I'm going to be building this rail diorama featuring the Sturmtiger which I built in a recent video and this 1/35th scale railcar from Sabre. So many people won't have seen a Sabre kit before, so let's have a closer look. It seems that most of their kits come with this very striking orange-yellow colour on the box art. We have one sprue for the railway track. This obviously does come with railway tracks. Not all wagon or rail kits do, but this one does. And then a relatively small number of sprues. You can see there, obviously those wooden panels are going to be the top of the rail car. Packed together quite tightly. And then a few sprues to the wheels. So it's a fairly small kit. And of course there are some decals. There's a surprising number of decals on a German railcar. The painting and decal guide is in full colour, which is nice. And you have the option of having those vertical supports on the side or not. And as you can see from the instructions here, these are the separate instructions for the railway. And this is the main instruction booklet for the wagon itself. The procedure is quite straightforward. Very clear CAD style diagrams, not at all cluttered, just a couple of pieces added per step. And so the construction starts with the 4 pieces which make the car bed. They're similar on top, but they're slightly different underneath, as you can see. A few injector pin marks there, but there's no point in sanding those off because they're going to be underneath the vehicle. You can see a tiny little bit of a gap between some of these plates, but nothing major, and a little bit of sanding or a tiny bit of filling will sort that out quite quickly. I'm not going to build this variant here with the vertical bars at the side because the Sturmtiger won't fit on if I do that. So the early steps involve building the underside of the rail car to give it some support and rigidity. You can't really go wrong here. I put a steel ruler alongside just to make sure that everything was absolutely dead straight. But that's not to say there was any room for movement really anyway. The fit was nice and tight with not a lot of tolerance. And equally the side panels here and the cross braces went on very well. Building up the wheel sections was slightly more complex, but again, it wasn't horrific. The parts can generally only go in one position or one direction. And the front and back are identical, so there's no big issues there either. And as you can see here as it builds up, there's a good amount of detail in the springs and the bolts and so on. This section here was slightly fiddly. You add these brakes onto the side panel, but you don't glue them in position so they can move around. That makes it very easy to dislodge them in the following steps. And to be honest, if I built this again, I'd be very tempted just to glue them in position, but make sure they're out of the way of the wheels so the wheels can still fit later. And this is the really fun piece of the instructions where you have to put the 2 side panels together with the 2 sets of wheels and that middle cross brace section and the 4 pipes there that you can see in dark grey, and get everything lined up, and they all connect with the little brakes on each side as well. That's quite a fun step. I actually cheated and didn't put those dark grey pipe sections on at first, and I added them separately. Each end of the rail car has a good amount of detail. It's got buffers, it's got hooks, it's got pipes. And the same with the side. These look almost like spare pieces of rail, but that would seem slightly strange to me, but then I don't really know. Building the tracks is simply a case of sliding the sleepers onto the rails. There aren't any location pins or any guidance to tell you exactly how far apart the sleepers should be, but it's not a big issue. One thing I did notice though, as you can see here, a lot of the sleepers were a little bit warped. That one on top there has got quite a curve on the end of it. I left the wheel assemblies separate for painting, And I gave the wooden deck a deliberately patchy coat of NATO black to act as a pre-shading layer. And then I went over the top of that with some Tamiya XF52 flat earth. And you can see the results here. It's got a nice amount of variation already. And then on top of that, in a few places, I darkened some sections with XF64 red-brown, very thin, and some XF78 wooden deck tan to make some highlights. For the main body colour, I went for XF22, which is RLM grey. As you can see here, it's got a slightly green tint to it. Looks very nice. And I applied the decals. The only mistake I noticed is that there are some decals which go below those spare rail sections on the side, and because I glued those spare rail sections in, I couldn't apply those decals, so I just left them off. Then it was a case of some detail painting. For the diorama base, I was inspired by this photo which I found online. This shows a mouse and a Sturmtiger on some railway wagons. You can even see actually the railway wagons sagging underneath the Sturmtiger there. I think these have been captured by the Russians. I wanted to do something along these lines, but the ground, the terrain here is a little bit plain, so I wanted to change that up slightly. To make the base, I mixed up some sculptor mould. This is a mix of plaster and paper. And after cutting some XPS foam to the right size and shape, I spread the sculptor mould on top. And while it was still wet, I pushed the railway tracks into it. This meant I couldn't paint the tracks at this stage, but it also meant the tracks were firmly attached to the base. And before the sculptor mould dries, you can smooth it out using your finger and a bit of tap water. And before it dried, I scattered some Woodland Scenics ballast on top. This is way more than I will need, and most of it will fall off later, but that's absolutely fine. I can always collect it back up and use it again. I did push down on this ballast to make sure it stuck to the sculptor mould. And to really hold the ballast down, I waited until the sculptor mould was dry, and then used some PVA mixed with water and dropped that over the top. And I did that several times. I also made sure that the edge of the ballast was feathered and not just a straight hard line parallel with the railway tracks. I then used some NOC 2.5mm static grass, and I attached it using some watered down PVA glue and my static grass applicator. I didn't show the process here because it is quite messy. If you're wondering why I haven't painted the base and if I'm worried about the white showing through, I'm not. I'm actually going to paint the entire thing, including the static grass. I'd never done that before, but I got the idea from a night shift video and I thought I would give it a go. On top of that short static grass, I added some longer 7mm grass, again using the static grass applicator. And then by hand I added some bunches of 12mm grass. Because I'm going to paint it, the colour here doesn't matter. And here you can see the base after an initial coat of Citadel Chaos Black. There's still quite a lot of green showing through, and it will need another coat. And once that second coat of black was applied, I airbrushed a base layer of green, which I made from park green and olive green. And at the same time I gave the railway tracks a coat of XF52 flat earth, and sometimes I mixed in a little bit of grey with that, XF19. Then I set about lightening the grass, so to my XF58 and X28 I added a small amount of XF3 yellow. And again, I haven't shown the airbrushing because my spray booth kind of gets in the way of the camera, but you can see here I have added highlights to various parts of the grass. Now at this stage there's one obvious problem, which is there's a very straight line still between the grass and the railway tracks. Unfortunately, there's no real way to break this up using the airbrush, because it's just going to end up with overspray everywhere. So I had to manually go through with a paintbrush and pick out first of all the rocks, giving them a variety of grey, brown, black kind of tones. And part of that process involved painting the rocks which are in the grass. They've obviously been painted green in that initial base coat and they need to be painted grey now. And hopefully as I do that you can see that that hard edge starts to get broken down a little bit. It's a little bit more feathered. And the second step in this process was to do the same thing with the grass. Now I didn't paint every single blade of grass because that would be a little bit crazy, but I tried to go in with a fairly dry brush and run the brush along the edge of the blades of grass which are near the edge of the railway, try to get some green colour on them, and again try to soften that transition. And I feel like that was fairly successful. It wasn't super hard, and again you don't have to be 100% accurate, but you do have to be fairly careful. And I think we can see there the results are not too bad. Bearing in mind of course that most of the centre of the rails will be covered by the wagon anyway. The rails themselves were painted in a saddle brown colour from Vallejo. And then I decided to use these three new products which I got recently. These are dark, medium and light rust deposits from AK Interactive. I didn't use the light deposit that much to be honest, but I applied those directly on top of the Vallejo paint, trying to get them to blend into each other a little bit. And of course the top of the rails should not be rusty because they've been polished by wheels, so I went over the top of those with some aluminium paint from the AK Real Colours range, and to apply that I put some paint on a sponge and ran the sponge along the rail. You could equally do it with a brush. I thought the composition could be improved by including some kind of trees or bushes, and I really love this material seafoam for making trees. I have a video which I'm going to link in the description for how to make seafoam trees. I've got loads of them left over from a previous project, so I took a few of them, broke some pieces off them and created some bushes. They were attached into small holes in the base using some super glue. Finally I wanted some colour. I acquired this red foliage recently. This is from Woodland Scenics. It comes in a variety of colours, yellow, orange, purple, white, but I thought red was best for this. And you can see there the results of me scattering it on top of some of the bushes. I remembered seeing this image of a Tiger 1 on a rail car with these logs acting as chocks, and I wanted to do something similar. So I took a couple of offcuts of XPS foam which I had lying around. I gave them a base coat of dark grey, and then I tried to paint them with acrylics. This was Tamiya Flat Earth. They really did not look good at this stage. And then I decided to put some thinned oil paints on them. This is burnt umber, followed by an even darker brown. I don't remember which colour this is. And I just spread them on quite thin, trying to get a semblance of wood grain, trying to make them look like old, not very high quality offcuts of wood. I think by the end they look not too bad, and you can always arrange things like this so the worst looking side is down. While I had the oil paints out, I thought that the bed of the railcar looked a little bit flat still, so I used some dark brown oil paints on the wood to apply a wash and bring the texture out. I was deliberately patchy here. Although I covered the entire railcar, in some cases I put much more paint on than others. I painted up a few pieces of old chain that I had laying around, and then I cracked out the AK Interactive dry mud effects, and I applied those onto the rail car and on the back of the tracks as if that's where the vehicle drove onto the car. And with that done, it only remained to add a figure. I know a lot of you have asked me in the comments to show you how I paint figures. I think you have quite a lot more faith in me than I do, but actually this video was filmed a while ago, so that's why I haven't shown you this figure. But I do have a couple of figures in an upcoming few models where I will show you what I do. At least then you can avoid those techniques, I guess. But yes, I painted this figure a few months ago, so it's not that I'm ignoring you guys. Okay, let's look at the final result. Well, there we go guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I had great fun building the Railcar from Sabre. It was a nice simple kit but with a good amount of detail. It went together really well. Sabre don't make a wide variety of kits, they tend to focus on railways in 1/35th scale at least. But if you are interested in that kind of subject, then I would highly recommend them. As for the diorama, I had a lot of fun with the static grass. It's something I've got lots of and I haven't used very much. And the tips from Night Shift's video about painting the grass rather than just putting it on and using the natural colour as it were, I think that worked quite well and it's something I'll be doing in the future as well. So guys, all that remains is for me to say thank you to my Patreon supporters. You can see their names on the screen now. Patreon supporters, as well as getting their names in each video, get access to work in progress photos of my various projects, which I don't necessarily post on my YouTube community page. So if that's something you're interested in, you can sign up in the link in the description. And guys, until next time, thank you everyone for watching. If you have any thoughts or comments on the video, then please do leave them below, and I hope to see you next time.